We have some microphones floating around the place, so stick your hands up. There's a gentleman in the back who was right on it.
I forgot all about that.
Hey,
Sir.
you guys talked about the 20% rule that Google does, and I'm just curious, in your own lives, what is your Freakonomics platform your 20%, or you also mentioned that you have a consultancy firm? Like, what is that 20% like is in your own lives, and how do you kind of divide that up, or is this kind of what you do every day, or just curious?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I would say that one of the great virtues of our luck and success with Freakonomics is we have so many opportunities to do so many great things that essentially we're kind of liberated from the drudgery that runs most people's lives, and we pick and choose. And so pretty much, other than right now we're on this horrendous book tour, which I never would agree to if I were not compelled with a gun to my head. But other than that, I pretty much only do the things that I enjoy. And so, so the writing of the books is really fun. And I still do my academic research, but I only do studies now that I'm really interested and really excited about.
Was the book a 20% project before you had written the book?
It's like my whole life is 20% now. I mean,
No, but before you're asking what, like the first book,
the
for
first
instance. Yeah,
one?
that's a good. Yeah.
Oh no.
It's like a 4% project.
No. The first book had exactly one motivation, which is that, the backstory is that Dubner and I met, didn't really like each other. He interviewed me. We left on pretty poor terms, but he wrote an amazing piece that glamorized me as the Superman of smart problem-solving stuff, which was totally false, but an incredibly valuable reputation that I've been milking for all I can ever since then. And part of the value of that was that the publishers came and wanted us to write a book. And so, we didn't even like each other, but we got to talking about, well, okay, so, what would it take to write a book? And I didn't want to write a book. He didn't want to write a book. But we both agreed that, journalists and economists, if you give us enough money, we'll do anything, okay? And it was just a matter of getting enough money. So honestly, the first book came about only because we got paid a ton of money to do it. And we had no expectations that anyone would read it. We didn't think it would be fun. It was pure prostitution. And it turns out sometimes prostitution has an upside, and it worked out. It worked out in ways we never, ever imagined that it would have worked out.
That's not the way I would have answered that question, just for the record.
We've had some strange questions up here, and that's one of the strangest answers. Okay, let's have a couple more. There's a gentleman at the back over there.
Great performance. Does anybody have a solution to the Fukushima nuclear power station that's blown up?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can answer that per se, but we've written about nuclear power a good bit. I don't know if we ever included it in a book. We wrote a New York Times column and did maybe some radio and blogging about it. So I think nuclear power is wildly misunderstood. The solution to Fukushima, which in retrospect is obvious, is don't build a nuclear power plant where you might get hit by a tsunami. Okay? And no one now would ever put that plant there. So that said, the damage, which has been substantial, is nowhere near as bad as it could have been. But the solution is to build a better... So, we're also talking about 3 generations ago of nuclear power plant design. But that leads to the bigger problem, which is that nuclear power, when it was discovered, you have to remember, or you have to realize, was considered almost a miracle, especially because of its origin. It was a byproduct of a nuclear bomb, which were meant to be purely destructive. And this byproduct was supposed to be energy that was literally, the phrase at the time was, too cheap to meter. Nuclear energy was going to be so cheap that you wouldn't even need to charge for it, right? So that was the idea. That turned out not to be true because the plants are more expensive to build and so on. But America started to build many. We built over 100 nuclear power reactors or plants. I can't remember the number now. And they were doing pretty well. But then there started to be a push against them because of the implied danger. And the implied danger seemed very great. The actual danger was more in question. There wasn't a lot of data to go on of how dangerous they were. But there was a lot of fear and therefore a lot of kind of protest against them. And then a movie came out called The China Syndrome, which was a very scary movie having to do with the meltdown of a big California nuclear power plant. And then 12 days after the movie, there was a real accident in a real power plant in Pennsylvania called 3 Mile Island. Now, this turned out to be a relatively minor. It was a meltdown, a reactor melted down, which was terrible, but there were no fatalities, and there actually wasn't much radiation escaped and so on. But the combination of the scary movie coming out and the accident shortly thereafter totally petrified an entire country and never built another nuclear reactor after that. Meanwhile, we exported our technology to other countries, France and elsewhere, Japan and so on. But because of that fear, we stopped moving forward to what would have been now third and fourth and fifth generation nuclear reactors, which are being built in some places in smaller versions and so on. But the bigger point of all that blather was this. We thought we were doing the right thing by responding to a fear, which was the fear of a nuclear meltdown at a power plant. And indeed, Chernobyl was a bad accident. Hopefully nothing like that will ever happen again. The circumstances under which it happened are hard to believe it would happen that badly again. But the bigger point is this. We substituted an implied fear that nuclear power was terrible for the status quo, which was burning coal. So we went on to burn many more tons of coal than we would have before. And coal is demonstrably bad and dangerous and dirty and polluting and so on. So if you tally up all the deaths from nuclear power over the history of humankind, I don't think they would equal 1 year's worth of death from just coal mining in China. So that's the kind of trade-offs we have when we don't like to look at data or get scared by things that may be frightening, but perhaps not as frightening as they ought to be.
We're going to have two very quick, possibly even one very quick question now.
We need a question from these two because they've been itching.
Go ahead.
So you've made it quite clear that experts predicting the future are really bad at it, and yet the media, presumably to feed a public want, still put experts predicting the future, however bad they are. Have you found a solution to making the public want the truth rather than loudmouths making wild predictions?
So that's a great question. I mean, in some domains, the experts try really hard to give you the truth. Like the weather is a good example, right? Because the weather is perfectly verifiable the next day. And so if the weatherman repeatedly says it's going to be sunny and every day it rains, you stop watching that weatherman or they get fired. So one great way of getting experts to tell the truth is to to make sure that their predictions are verifiable. And so I think it'd be a great service to society if there were people or government task forces that were devoted to actually looking at the predictions and publicizing the false predictions that were made in the past. So, right, the thing is, if I make a wild prediction, if I say in front of you today, I believe that the FTSE is going to crash by 30% within this week. Okay? If it happens, I will talk about that. Every speech I ever make will talk about the time I predicted that. And I have private incentives to do that. But if it doesn't happen, there's nobody else out there. Right? Dubner's not going to start his speeches by saying, well, Levitt once predicted that and it didn't happen. Nobody cares. And so I think there's a real asymmetry there. So
can I just say for the record, you just advocated the establishment of a government task force?
It doesn't have to be government. It'd be better if someone else did.
There is Pundit Tracker. Have you ever seen Pundit Tracker? So you should look it up. It's primordial, but it's what Levitt's describing, which is a bunch of guys keeping track of pundits' predictions, and it's small. It's like they have Paul Krugman being, I can't remember, either perfectly bad or perfectly terrible, but it was based on one prediction. So Krugman makes a lot. It'd be good, but that's what I have I have in my family an example of one way to think about it, which is that, like Levitt says, bad predictions don't get penalized, which is part of the problem. But I don't know if this story made the news over here, but about 2 Mays ago, there was this preacher in the U.S. named Harold Camping who predicted the end of the world. I don't know if you heard about this. So he basically said, we've been living this life that is leading to despoilment of the planet. and the planet, it's going to be the apocalypse, and the only people who will be spared are the people who follow my religious teachings. And, you know, to me, you know, most of us probably would hear something like this and not really think about it much at all. But, you know, like you're saying, an authority figure gets on TV, and my son, who was like 10 at the time, he saw this guy in a suit saying that the world was going to end, and he got really, really scared, my son. And so he came to me, and I said, I was so bad at this. I remember the line, I said, no credible people treat this scare with any legitimacy. As it sounded like a government statement, like I was covering up something. And then he said...
Have you spoken to a child before?
Yeah, no. And then he said, no offense, Dad, but could you ask someone smarter than you about the possibility of the world ending? So I wrote to this guy that we know that we've written about, a guy named Nathan Myhrvold, who's a very smart guy in a number of ways, including he's an astrophysicist. And Nathan took time out to write my son, Solomon, a really nice long email saying why it just wasn't going to happen. But my son was still really distraught. And in like the 2 or 3 days leading up to the day when the world was supposed to end, because there was a date, my son was like, it was horrible. He was like crying himself to sleep at night. And I felt, as a parent, I felt terrible. You want to protect your kids from real fears, but so it's even worse for him to be so scared of something that I didn't think even legitimate. And then the next morning, the day that the world was supposed to end, we woke up in New York, where we live, and it was this beautiful spring day. And I'm up early. Solomon comes out for breakfast, and he says hello, da-da-da. And I said, hey, you know, cool, we're still here. And with the false bravado of a 10-year-old says, you know, I was never really worried about it, which was totally not true. And I said to him, well, you know, Solomon, what do you think should be done about this guy who went around all over saying that the world was going to end, you know? And my son, who's a very peaceful, compassionate, loving little guy, he says, oh, that's easy. They should take him outside and shoot him. So it'd only take one instance of that. I'm not advocating, but once would probably ward off a lot of the future bad predictions. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a good place to end it, but end it we will do.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did die. Yeah.
Not as a result of the son taking him. So please join me in saying thank you very much for a very interesting hour-long discussion.
Thank you.
They will be sticking around, so if you didn't get your question asked, maybe you can ask it later. But thank you very much indeed for coming.